Welcome and thank you for joining today's conference, ONAP National Best Practice Webinar featuring Bering Straits Regional Housing Authority. Before we begin, please ensure you have opened the WebEx participant and chat panels by using the associated icons located at the bottom of your screen. Please note that all audio connections are muted at this time. If you require technical assistance, please send a chat to the event producer. With that, I'll turn the conference over to Heidi Frechette, Deputy Assistant Secretary with the Office of Native American Programs. Please go ahead.
Great. Thank you, Tyler. So everyone, this is Heidi Frechette. I'm very excited to be here today and to host HUD's Office of Native American Programs' third installment of our National Best Practices webinar series, where we highlight housing accomplishments from across Indian country. In the previous webinars, we featured the Lummi Nation's Housing Authority's Chelangan Village, a gated transformational housing development located in Bellingham, Washington. The village is a 45 housing unit complex that provides housing with wraparound supportive services for families making transformational life changes. We've also featured San Felipe Pueblo's Black Mesa subdivision, a 150-unit home ownership subdivision located just outside of Albuquerque, New Mexico, where the Tribal Housing Authority utilized Title VI and Section 184 financing to construct much-needed housing for the community. Both webinars are recorded and available on our HUD.gov/Code Talk website. As we move to the next slide, we are pleased to be featuring today the Bering Straits Regional Housing Authority located in Nome, Alaska. Under the leadership of President and CEO Chris Kolarek, the Housing Authority constructed the first housing built in 10 years in the native village of Suvunga on the St. Lawrence Island in the Bering Sea in Alaska. He utilized HUD's Title VI Loan Guarantee Program to finance the construction of 4 single-family houses and 1 duplex. These units are also the first units Bering Straits built through a force account. The homes, which face an unforgiving climate, are built to last to at least 25 years and, very importantly, are highly energy efficient. So as we move to the next slide, we are honored to have Chris Kolarek, President and CEO of the Bering Straits Regional Housing Authority, as our presenter today. Chris has been with the Housing Authority for just over 2 years and has overseen the construction of new units at Suvunga and Gamble, as well as the new housing office. He's currently leading the efforts of rehabbing their old housing office into new elder units. Some amazing accomplishments in such a short time. Chris, welcome. We are looking forward to your presentation and learning more about your amazing and inspiring work and the region that you serve.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. At least west of the East Coast, it is still morning. I want to thank you, Deputy Assistant Secretary Frechette, and your team for featuring our small corner of America for today's webinar. It is a blessing to be able to share with you the many successes and the few areas for improvement in our journey to build the 6 homes that we have in Suvunga. Just a little bit of background on our construction process. Bering Straits Regional Housing Authority, we have a very orthodox history of affordable housing development. We have traditionally built homes with our IHBG, and our allocation was either used in a single year or we saved it up over a year or 2 and then used all of that savings for development. And that's a very orthodox history, and it is very limiting. I recently heard Jason Adams say in a presentation that if his tribe had only used their Nahasda grant in the traditional way, it would have taken 100 years to build what they had built in the last 10 years. I think that's very inspiring, and it's a very laudable accomplishment. And my goal is to get to that level financial innovation and construction innovation, and I believe we will step by step. Before I get into this presentation, I want to make sure people come away with 2 points that we have experienced from our experience. The first one is that the Title VI loan guarantee was essential for the project in Savoonga to happen. And 2, acting as our own general contractor and managing this project by force account saved us approximately 39% of the total project cost over a design-build contract. Without one of these 2 features, we would not have been able to build as many units or build them in the time period that we did. Without both of these features, we would have probably built only 2 or 3 units instead of 6, and it might have taken us 2 or 3 years of saving and scrimping instead of being able to engage in a 1-year process. So as we move through this, those are 2 of the innovations that we've utilized for this project. I'll back up just a bit and talk a bit about our agency. You know, the Housing Authority, we have a workforce of 16 people, but we also have approximately 50 to 75 additional people during the summer for construction projects and on hand throughout the year to work on rehabilitation or work on emergency maintenance as problems arise in our far-flung villages. We accomplish what we do with a total annual budget between $7 and $10 million. That budget goes up as we take on Title VI debt, and that's built on the back of a Indian Housing Block Grant or Native American Housing Block Grant of $6.1 million for this past fiscal year. We can take a look at our region. On the next slide, you'll see a quick intro, a quick map of where we are in the world and in Alaska. And just so you're aware, this picture here on the left with all the snow was taken in May. That wasn't the dead of winter. So just an introduction to our climate. Our villages in the Bering Straits Regional Housing Authority, we comprise tribes and villages in the Northwest Alaska. Our headquarters is in Nome, which is the terminus of the Iditarod Trail sled dog race. And our villages are as close to Russia as possible without actually speaking Russian. Our people on Little Diomede Island, they're out in the west, or is their tribal name Inulik. They used to have cousins that were just a few miles away on Big Diomede Island until the Soviet Union moved them all to the mainland of Russia and put up radar installations to spy on us. Our region is so remote and so far into the Bering Sea that when we traveled to Savoonga on April 29th, there were still 5 feet of snow on the ground. And the climate is such that as we were there, snow was melting several inches a day. The week before we arrived, we actually had 3 feet of snow melt prior because of the sun was shining hot and bright. So just to share with you some of the remoteness and the lack of infrastructure, when we traveled to Savoonga, we had 1 day of delays due to non-functional equipment at the airport. And as we were there, we had an additional 3 days of continuous delays because of that non-functional equipment. Because of how far away Savoonga is from Nome, if the navigation equipment is not working, we have to have near perfect weather to make the airplane trip. And just for a little bit of information on our weather, Savoonga and Gamble out there on St. Lawrence Island regularly experience hurricane-force winds that would evacuate Florida. but because of their remoteness and location, they hold in place, and we have to build for that. So on the next slide, we'll get a little bit of intro into some of the differences of our Alaskan housing authorities versus the lower 48. We could spend an entire graduate level semester on this, but I'll see what I can do in a few minutes. We do not have reservations, and our tribes are not really land-based tribes, as in much of the lower 48. Our tribal system was created in part to keep Alaska Native tribes from exercising land sovereignty over the massive oil fields in Prudhoe Bay, Alaska. And it would have been a multi-generational fight to claim sovereign title and to settle our land claims. But in the middle of that, Atlantic Richfield, now owned by Phillips, and BP and Exxon were eager to develop those massive oil fields, and they pressured Congress into reaching a land settlement because between 1960 and 1970, a federal judge ruled that there would be no oil development in Alaska until land claims were settled. So one of the compromises that came out of that was the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act of 1971, passed by Congress. We received 44 million acres of fee simple land and a cash severance held by 12 corporations, for-profit corporations, in order to settle our claims of land ownership in our home. Each large region received a regional corporation that acted as a kind of larger entity, and each village received its own small local corporation. The village corporations had land rights on the surface of their fee simple land, and the regional corporations received land in themselves, and they received the subsurface rights to all village lands. So it's a complicated land system, and it's an interesting system. One of the things that the state of Alaska realized in 1971 was that there was not a vehicle for Alaskan tribes to receive funding for housing through HUD. And so under state law, Native associations on a regional level were given the authority to create housing authorities that covered their large region. And we came into being in 1974 because of that. Now, between 1974 and the founding of Nahasta, the stand-in for a quote-unquote tribe was our regional association. So for our quote-unquote tribe under the old 37 Act, it's actually our regional corporation. And several villages did not join a large regional corporation. Gamble and Savunga, for example, on St. Lawrence Island. They own all of their land, surface and subsurface, and are not part of Bering Straits Native Corporation. Just to kind of put a context on this, so our tribal leaders in 1971, they recognized that we could either take the deal that was offered by Congress, or we could fight in the courts for a generation or two or three. So when we talk about Alaska tribes being different, it's important to understand this history that the difference was not sought out by us. It happened to us, which is why we are often so quick to mention the differences between Alaska and the lower 48 in tribal affairs. And the next slide, you can see how our regional housing authorities are broken up along those Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act corporate areas. Bering Straits Regional Housing Authority, we're up in the upper left corner there, but the regional housing authorities generally follow the boundaries of the regional corporations along the Ansel lines. And there's one more piece of interesting housing law, housing regulation that confounds some of our Alaskan tribes. On the next slide, you'll see something called the Stevens Rider. And that basically is a Alaska-specific rider to NAHASA funding bills that state that a tribe or a tribally designated housing entity must have been receiving funds in fiscal year 2005 to receive the next fiscal year's funds. And what that means is that tribes who were independent of a housing authority are able to receive funds, but it is a way to keep housing authorities intact rather than having villages, village-based tribes sort of breaking away from the consortium, the housing authority consortium. And it can go backwards, though. Housing authority tribes that were independent in 2005 may rejoin the housing authority, and we have had one that did that in 2006, and we have another tribe that is discussing with us about rejoining this year or in the next year. One of the reasons why individual tribes may want to sort of be independent of a regional housing authority is that the cost of construction is often cited as a reason for tribes wanting to assert their independence from the regional housing authority. And when a hub village is able to construct housing at a lower cost, it's because they are exactly that. They're a transportation and logistical hub of their region. So that's a bit of background. It is a complex background, but it sort of gives a little reason why we're different. I want to move a bit to what we have been doing as a housing authority in the last few years, and you'll see a bit on the next slide about where we've been constructing. In 2014, we had a backlog of units that we constructed. We constructed about 14 units in 4 villages. And in 2015, we actually constructed 5 units in a village called Brevig Mission. And that was our first use of Title VI loan guarantee in Brevig Mission. And that one was, we were particularly proud. We had not had the experience with it. We were stepping out on a limb. Our Board of Commissioners was a bit worried about it. But after that positive experience, we quickly decided that we would utilize the Title VI loan guarantee in Sivunga and Gamble, and preferably into every other project that we have that is of significant size. You know, we have a region, just as you're looking at our recent developments, you can see we're not talking about a lot of units developed. And part of that you can see on the left is because of our geographic size. We have a region that's the size of Maryland or West Virginia with 12,000 people. And so with a large geography and a low population, the cost and the ability for us to develop new housing units is fairly limited, but we give it our best go. As we move along, there's a list of our member tribes on the next slide that, just as an example of the 18 tribes that are within the housing authority, and we have 18 tribes because, again, Bering Straits Regional Corporation is considered a tribe under the old 37 model. So as the formula is funding the old FCAS units, we interact with that regional corporation as well. So that's a quick list of who is a member of the Housing Authority, and we operate sort of on a consortium model on behalf of these tribes. We can move on to some of our basic programs, what we do, and you can see them listed on the next slide with our kind of a whole list of everything we can do, home improvements and renovations, home buyer counseling, apprenticeship, and improvement. Some of the things that we include in our annual plan is just the ability to work on handicap access for our village, our tribal members in our villages, as well as emergency maintenance and repair. One of our biggest expenses is in the middle of winter, a boiler goes down, and that means a family is without heat in January in minus 25-degree weather. And so if we don't have somebody on hand in the village where that happens, we have to send somebody with a boiler and a kit of tools to make that repair. But as an authority, we can't allow somebody to go without heat in the middle of winter. That'd be a little too rough. So let's move into our planning process. You'll see on our next slide a bit about what we do as we plan for construction and as we talk about construction. This picture is actually one of our new units. You'll see it's on pilings that are driven into the ground down to bedrock. When we are planning for projects, one of the key features is, of course, we have to alternate where we construct. With 14 villages and 18 tribes, we actually have to move around the region, and there's going to be necessarily time between construction projects. What we have to do in order to prioritize where those projects will be is we have to take into a scoring matrix. And that scoring matrix gives us an objective view of where we should be building next. And the matrix, it's a multi-page document that has metrics such as the current tenant account receivables of the members of the community, the size of the wait list, the existing wait list for housing in that community. We also have items on community readiness and infrastructure. For example, if there is dock facilities or storage facilities for our construction material and equipment, down to if water and sewer is available, other items that make it so that we can build in those communities easier. And the easier it is for us to build, the higher their score. Now, when we talk about planning and how we get the process started, once we've figured out a community that we need to build in, there are meetings that we need to hold to make sure that the community is aware of what we're doing. On an annual basis, we meet with each of our tribal councils in each of the villages. And we do that as part of our Indian Housing Plan certification. Because we have 14 villages with 18 tribes that designate us as their TDHE, we actually need to get their sign-off every year for the Indian Housing Plan. And we take that opportunity to discuss in general what we do, and we also ask for feedback as we're presenting the next year's plan and budget. We're asking feedback on what's working and not, what's needed. We generally have a special purpose trip to each village so that the tribal council can take as long or as short as they need to discuss with us. When we get a little further down into the planning, we make sure our engineers fly to our communities to conduct surveillance. so that the civil engineer and the geotechnical engineer can actually put their eyes on where we're discussing development, which is important. In the past, and perhaps this might be the way with some of you on the line today, if your engineers are not actually putting their eyes on where they're building, that's not going to be the optimal outcome. Their report and their design is not going to be as good as if they actually walk the ground and feel it. It adds some cost to the project, but it's important that they actually viscerally feel what's happening. We have community meetings as well prior to design finalization, or once we get down to a preliminary design to solicit input. In this process, when we meet with tribal councils, when we attend annual meetings of the tribe, one of the comments we usually get two. Our number one comment is usually the condition of people's homes. And that there's a mix of people who are in our program and people who have graduated from the program and have been conveyed a home. For the people in our program, it requires us to do quite a bit of education and continuous education and maybe re-education about the obligations of home ownership and being a home buyer. There was perhaps a history stretching even back to the BIA days, back before the 1970s, where housing would fix everything. And people were instructed not to touch their homes because housing would fix it. And it's taken us a good long time to be reiterating that that's not the way that we work anymore. That's not the way that government views its funding opportunity anymore. That people are expected, if they purchase a home and are in our program, they're expected to conduct their routine maintenance. For the people who are outside of our program or never inside the program, it gives us a good indicator of how many people are living in tough conditions. The second most comment we usually get is on the need for new housing and how overcrowded people's homes are. And later we'll see some statistics on it, but we don't have a community meeting anymore where people aren't discussing how overcrowded they are. And actually, let's talk about overcrowding here. On the next slide, we can see some comparison about our current housing conditions. When it reaches the level of a U.S. Senator, you can tell that the conversation is happening, and it's happening often, about overcrowding. In the rest of the United States, we have an overcrowding rate of 2% or so. In our entire region, our overcrowding rate is somewhere around 37%. But in Savunga, where we just built 6 homes, our overcrowding rate is 61%. And the terms overcrowding and severe overcrowding, as they're used by HUD, they do not adequately capture overcrowding where we're at. And I think, I think my colleagues in the upper Midwest will agree with me here, and elsewhere in Indian country, that our overcrowding rate is nearing New York City turn of the 19th century tenement levels. We have heard, my first month on the job, I heard in a village of 18 people in a 3-bedroom home, a 3-bedroom home of 1,100 square feet. There's 18 people in there. And so when there's a HUD definition of severe overcrowding of 1.5 persons per room, that doesn't even come near to the problem of severe overcrowding that we are facing. So we need a new definition, or we need a new lens on what that means. And for us, generally are coming to accept, and we've been saying for a while that we don't have homelessness. Our homeless are in our severely overcrowded homes. So the things that happen with crowding at that level is that literally people are required to sleep in shifts so that there are people who can be asleep in a bedroom and other people are awake, giving people those bed spaces and those quiet spaces. And it's usually the children who are sleeping during sleeping hours. And the adults are giving those kids that chance to sleep so that they can go to school and learn. And anyone in the home that may have a job, a 9-to-5 job, or maybe an elder. The people who are awake during the evening hours, they then sleep after everyone else gets up for school or possibly work. And this creates a cycle where those people who are awake at night, they don't have a chance even at a regular employment, at an income to lift themselves up. So it's detrimental and it becomes cyclical to the economic well-being of our families. With a lot of people, there's a lot of moisture expressed in just breathing. 18 people in a 1,100 square foot space really degrades the indoor air quality, and it really contributes to mold and the degradation of material in the home. And just kind of this is a social implication. In a home that's severely overcrowded, if one person is experiencing substance abuse, the other 17 people are as well. So our severe overcrowding is not just a building issue, a safety issue, it's also a social safety issue and an economic issue for people being able to actually get up and get to work. And why do we have the severe overcrowding? I mean, how are people living in such conditions? Well, during 7 months of the year, 8 months of the year, if people were unsheltered in Savoonga or in any of our communities, they would die. There is no doubt about that. If they were on the quote-unquote street in Savoonga, they would not live. And so our families, Savoonga is a 700-person community. Everyone is a family, and everyone has known each other since they were born. They will, out of their familial love, take in people who need a place to sleep, and they'll subject themselves to these health issues, to the economic, cyclical degradation of their economic livelihood out of the love for their family and friends to keep them from dying. So when we talk about overcrowding and we talk about homelessness in our communities, I think this is happening in many other places in Indian country. It's a bigger issue than just being able to put up 4 walls. It's the physical, mental, and economic health of our people. As we advance to the next slide, I have some questions on research and outcomes. We know things that happen like increases in respiratory illness in severely overcrowded homes. We know that children in severely overcrowded homes express behavioral issues at school and have lower performance because of the stress of being at home. The problem is we don't have enough research that's Alaska specific or Native American specific. I've actually begun discussing with our university, a think tank at our university, about commissioning research here. And they have discussed how they could not get peer review because all of their research was based on Northern Canada. Because Northern Canada actually has lots of research on the impacts of overcrowding. And so an American university professor not being able to advance their research interests because we don't have any research is a conundrum that how do we break that? We need at least one research area. So I'm actually discussing starting with a low-level research project in my villages here in the Bering Straits. We can move on to kind of, let's get a view of the rural challenges of construction kind of, and you'll see some listed on our next slide. Our transportation issues are difficult. You know, if we're way out in the Bering Sea, in the northwest corner of America, almost touching Russia, our villages cannot get material where they need it to be. So we have the ability to air freight items into a village, which is prohibitively expensive, or we can send it on a barge during the 4 months that the barge will be able to run during summertime. And what that leads to is very long procurement lead times. We need at least 7 to 9 months before construction to procure material to make sure everything arrives where it needs to be. And in construction, no matter what happens, every construction project, you're going to forget something, something walks off the job site. One of the things that, that we always have to do is, we need another box of nails. And so we have $10 boxes of nails that we spend $25 to ship out to the site. Just as an example of what the cost of shipping is, if you take a airplane trip out to where you're going, if you divide your ticket cost by your weight, you start getting an understanding of the logistical cost of moving items where we need them to be. Our freight costs, even on a boat, are pretty substantial. Depending on how much we're buying and what we're buying, we have to budget in at least 30% for the transportation, and we have to add a large contingency because we don't know where the logistical bottleneck is going to be. If something doesn't make a barge from a supplier, we've got to put it on an airplane. So there's some contingency. But just for an example, in 2015, there was a construction project in Hooper Bay, much to the south of our region, but on the west coast of Alaska on the Bering Sea. Their material cost was equal to their transportation cost. And so just getting the material to where you're at is actually doubling the price of that material. And we can see it in our material goods. In Savunga, gasoline is $6 per gallon, and so is heating fuel is $6 per gallon. And milk, a gallon of milk is actually $10 per gallon there. And it's not market forces, supply and demand isn't saying that milk is $10 a gallon. Most of the people there can't afford that. It's just getting it shipped in makes the cost that high. Our construction window is understandably tight. We can get the materials to Savunga maybe at the end of June if we have an early summer, and full construction can't really start until after the 4th of July due to, we need to inventory and we need to organize the construction site. And we have to have everything outside completed by October. And just, in a village of 700 people, there is no hardware store. There's no to collect anything. So what does that look like? Well, you can see in our next set of pictures, on our next slide there, those are homes. Those are pallets that are actually going to become homes. The landing craft, the course of this material was shipped from Anchorage to Nome. It was taken off of a big barge and put on this small landing craft. And this landing craft beaches as close to shore as possible without being grounded, and a giant loader drives out, drives up the plank of the boat, the craft, and starts unloading items there. There's no dock, there's no moorage. It's literally just on a bigger scale of you getting out of your rowboat and tying up on a beach. So let's talk a bit about Savoonga specifically. You can see a little map on the next slide of where we're at. It's on St. Lawrence Island in the middle of the Bering Sea. The distance between Savoonga and Nome is 150 miles, and that's over water. And like I said, the weather has to be good for us to make it by airplane. It's accessible by air when the weather's good, and it's accessible by water, but without a dock, we have to double our transportation costs because it has to come off of a big boat in Nome and being put on a small landing craft to make it out to St. Lawrence Island. On the next slide, we have a little bit more items on the community. Gamble and Savoonga are sisters on that island, connected by history and family and subsistence food. This is an island where 75% of their calories are still harvested from the ocean, whale, walrus, seal, fish. So this is a very traditional place. Gamble on the western side of St. Lawrence Island is 40 miles from the Chukchi Peninsula. And so everybody, when they go out their front door, they can literally see Russia from their house. The Indian Housing Block Grant for Savoonga was about $600,000, and that's a need-only grant. The regional corporation, through us, also receives their old FCAS. And it's a young community. There are approximately half of the community is under the age of 19. So the population is growing, and it is going to continue growing over time. So let's take a look at an actual picture of Savoonga. Here you can see it from the air, and on the lower left corner you see where all the boats are. That's kind of an area, like that's their closest thing they have to a dock. But on the, as we look in the upper right corner, that very large building is the school. And going back to those demographics, because the size of the community, because the size of the young population, a good 35 to 40% of the people are at the school Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, their kids in school. And our development, to give you a visual, if we go up that center main road, we follow it to the kind of top, there's a empty land that's where the housing units stop in the middle there. And we've built on that empty quarter there, up near the top of that main road. So this must have been in the middle of July when this picture was taken, because it's actually green and looks like a nice place to be. So with that background, we'll kind of talk about our Title VI financing, some information, what we did. So again, like our first use was in 2015 for a village called Brevig Mission. In Savoonga, we took down a loan of $1.9 million, and it was our second loan, and it covered about 40% of the project cost. We structured it as a 10-year payoff so that it wouldn't be tying up the need portion for too long, and there was some use of proceeds in the housing and the infrastructure that was needed to build the homes. And you know, the maximum Title VI loan is based on the need portion of the block grant. 5 times the villages or the tribes need grant is what is able to be guaranteed by the Title VI. There's one bank in Alaska that conducts Title VI loans, and that's First National Bank. And one of our one of the things that we've discovered, we were worried about it at first, but after using it in 3 villages, we are on board with how important that guarantee is to securing financing for our construction projects. And we kind of move along a little bit to the next slide. I want to talk a bit about how the process, my feeling of the process. When I came to this, my background's in finance, so I have no worry about utilizing debt to maintain liquidity, and that's exactly what Title VI provided us. It gave us flexibility, and it gave us liquidity so that if we ran into any issues, we had that backstop for us for the construction finance. We started the process with sending a letter with some information to our local ONAP office and to headquarters, and we had multiple conversations before we made it official that we were seeking a Title VI loan. And the conversations were basically that the headquarters Title VI loan officer and our local ONAP office, they wanted to make sure that we knew what we were going after. They wanted to make sure we understood the process, and they wanted to go through all of the pre-planning, the planning, and the execution. The ONAP office and the loan officer for us, the Title VI specialist, they weren't like a government regulator trying to make sure we complied and there was only one way of compliance and it was arduous. They were like a partner to us, walking through the process with us. And it made it a very easy process to go through. So I just want to make that plug. If anyone listening is thinking about Title VI loan guarantee, talk with your local office and start that relationship. Based on my experience, your ONAP office wants you to succeed, and they're going to help you to succeed. So that's kind of my opinion on that. Moving a bit on to discuss some of the procurement materials in Savoonga, we've got to make sure that we've got our plans in place a couple of years in advance. We've got to make sure that our project budget is fat with contingency, and the Title VI allows us to have that flexibility to scale up or down. In Savoonga, we already had layout designs on hand. We needed them engineered and stamped. But we were operating under the assumption that we were definitely going there, and that as we were moving down the process, our final year or final few months of planning was a sort of foregone conclusion. And so and this was a sped up process because we had been planning earlier. So by June, we had 90% of our financial plan in place and budgeted. By July, we had our Indian housing plan fleshed out and begun receiving approvals by our tribal councils. The RFP for the big items was pushed out in October, which provided us enough time to field calls, have people have amendments for clarification, a protest window, and a very, very late procurement period and award in December and January. Because we had been moving towards this was the window that we had right now we are actually in this process with 2 other villages, and we're doing it 1 full year ahead of this schedule. So for Savoonga, the barge loaded in early May in Anchorage, and it landed finally in Savoonga in late June for construction in July. And I want to talk a bit about, over the next few slides, over our some of the construction challenges that we faced. So if we move on to our next slide, we'll talk a little bit about what the construction challenges were. Advance the slide, please. So, like I said, we began in early July, and it lasted through October for the external items. Some of the issues that we face is we have to put on large metal sheets on an island in the middle of the Bering Sea. So 30-mile-an-hour winds are pretty common. We can't put all of our construction material into the landfill because it's a small island without a permitted dump. So all of our material has to come back on connexes. So we have to treat it like a national park, and that adds quite a bit of cash to our construction budget. And sewer and water were maxed out for this area, so we actually had to add a lift station to provide additional capacity to the sewer system. But some of the good things, some of the positive things out of this, we were able to use a local gravel pit owned by the local corporation. We were able to use dump trucks and loaders owned by the local tribe and by the city. And so because we were utilizing forced account project management, we knew that if we talked to the locals, we could actually get material and get equipment, and it would be slightly cheaper than if we had just barged them in as a rental from Anchorage. All of our items, all of our homes had to be weather tight by October because after that it would start snowing and have severe wind gusts. And so that means that as long as everything is weather tight, we can do the interior work through December and maybe. And then there were some issues with that we learned along the way that an experienced contractor has learned these lessons earlier. We have our units are so weather tight. The envelope of the home is so tight that we actually have moisture issues, like people's breath is actually creating moisture issues in the homes. So we're going back to our homes to add in heat recovery and ventilation units to the process. So moving on, we can see a little bit, I want to talk a little bit about the energy efficiency that we have constructed these homes with. We used a process or a material called a structurally insulated panel for the walls and the ceiling and the floor. And structurally insulated panel is basically 2 pieces of plywood that sandwich a foam, a polyurethane foam. The foam we used was extra heavy. It was an 8-pound foam that provided the structural rigidity and the support. The foam itself was that heavy. And between all of the foam, the floor, the concrete that we poured into the home that provides a large thermal mass, we were looking at a home that was energy efficient to the point where I'd never seen. Our ceilings were on the order of our 60, and our walls were on the order of just shy of our 50. And the location, we had to have some items like a metal roof because of the heavy snow load. And in addition, we use LED lighting in our homes, and we use double pipe oil burners for our heat because that only means one hole in the side of the house for the boiler rather than two. So those are some of the features that we did. There's some more on our next slide. We actually used 5-star energy rated windows that have 3 glass panes. We also, so in all together, the energy use of our homes was rated at over 5-star. What that practically means for our home buyers, our home buyers are of course low-income people, and with heating oil being $6 a gallon, what all this work put into it meant that our homes are burning 30 gallons of heating fuel per month, as opposed to some of our older homes, less efficient homes, burning 1 to 200 gallons per month. So we put a lot of time and effort into making our homes affordable for the people that are there. We did not just build an affordable home to construct. It's a home people can afford to actually live in. And we built to a high energy standard. One of our grant sources was the Alaska Housing Finance Corporation. That was one of the motivators for us to also build with a high efficiency. As you turn the next slide, you can actually see some of our what our SIP panels look like. Very thick, lots of foam to keep the cold out and the warm in. And the floor was actually a SIP panel, and on top of that we poured concrete for the rigidity and for the thermal mass. We also built not just for energy efficiency but for longevity. On the next slide you'll actually be able to see one of the features. We actually have those pilings that were driven down to bedrock, and those are actually helical piers. So there's actually a hook on the bottom that actually hooks into the rock itself. We've been having when we build with a focus on the lowest cost, we can build things that are not going to last for a long time. And now with 40 years of experience and 40 years of managing homes and having to go back and look at our homes, some of our construction costs we have to look back and say, we have to save money, of course, but we also have to spend extra money here and there to make sure the home will last a while. So that's one of the reasons why we constructed with these helical piers for the rigidity, and also concrete. It provides the structural strength in the home. Some of the items that we also built longevity kind of in a social sense, our living rooms and dining spaces are very large because of large family pressure, and because we know that people are going to have community dinners and family dinners, and for some of these people, their grandchildren will move back in with them, so they need large spaces to accommodate what for some of them will become a multi-generational home. We constructed a different toilet system based on our sewer system, and some things that we learned in our building for longevity. We figured out that items like vinyl plank flooring from Home Depot, resilient flooring, for where we're at is actually a better floor. Concrete was expensive, it was heavy, it required quite a bit of skilled labor to put down, versus a resilient vinyl floor from a standard home improvement store, which will be water fast, which will take a beating, but also can be repaired and replaced very easily and laid down very easily. And we'll also use some baseboard heating because of the ease of its repair. So as we're building for longevity, we're also taking note of some of the items that we could have built, some lessons we learned in the building. Moving to our next slide, you can kind of see some of the items we put in there. On the upper left picture, you can actually see the gravel pad we laid down. And we laid down a gravel pad, a monolithic pad, to accommodate all of the homes, plus additional expansion homes, to prevent sloughing or to prevent the sides of that gravel pad eroding, which is a problem for us in some of our older homes, as well as those pictures of those helical piers that are between 7 and 20 feet deep. We built these homes to be efficient so people could afford them, and we built them to last so that over the long term we don't have a home that just disintegrates. We'll move on to some of the other items that we discussed. Moving on, we used a method of project management. We acted as our own general contractor, and we used force account labor. It was our first time in many of our employees' memories that we used force account rather than putting it out to bid to a contractor. 80% of our people were from the local community. We knew that if we managed the project, that we could find and vet the people from Gamble and Savunga. We had 32 people. We needed a large crew. 32 seems large when you have a 6-unit construction project. But remember when I said that Savunga and Gamble get 75% of their calories from the ocean? We needed a large crew so that they could peel off and engage in subsistence hunting and fishing. And we needed a large crew so that no individual would work so much that they would not be able to qualify for housing assistance. And just kind of in general, I mentioned this at the very beginning, but doing this as our own general and utilizing force account labor, we saved $1.8 million off of the lowest contractor's bid. That's 39% of the total project cost. That's about $300,000 per housing unit. And that was us working, and in addition to that money that we saved, we made a special effort to recruit labor locally, to procure items from our local tribe and corporation and city, even to the point where we actually repaired pieces of equipment that the city had. And because of that repair, we didn't have to pay for the equipment to be shipped in from outside the village. And when we were done, those pieces of equipment were still running, so there was a benefit to the local community. Moving along, all of that work has resulted in what we have today, which is duplexes, a duplex with 2 900 square foot units, 3-bedroom units that are 1,200 feet, and 4-bedroom units that are 1,300 feet. They all have an 80-foot Arctic entry because people, again, they're subsistence hunters and fishers. They're going to be having a lot of gear that they need for their activities, or they're actually going to be putting up meat to dry and store in those Arctic entries. We're able to build below total development cost. We did not need a waiver. And our complete cost included our development of the lift station in Savunga. And one of the things that one of the results is saving $1.8 million over a contractor. It gives us the wiggle room to go back and make sure that we cross our I's and dot our T's. Nope, I got that backwards. it gives us the room to be able to make changes that we need to make changes. So adding in the heat recovery and ventilation systems into these homes, we have that ability because of our force account use. Moving on, you can take a look at our sources and uses. On our next slide, you'll see we have a Title VI loan of nearly $2 million. We received a state grant and we used our Indian Housing Block Grant. The land was donated by the corporation. We actually sign a 50-year lease, 25 years between us and the corporation, and an automatic 25-year extension for the home buyer when their home is conveyed to them. The housing units were $3.7 million, and the infrastructure, which is our lift station to the sewer system, was about $878,000. As we move on to our future plans, we have a very nice picture of our project, assistant project administrator, discussing, showing our visitors one of our communities. This year we are scheduled to complete 3 units for the King Island tribe. Next year also 3 units for Shaktoolik. And we have an additional 3 villages, 3 tribes where we are attempting to put together plans for development, but they are in extremely difficult to develop places. So they're kind of at the end of our 5-year plan to give us time to talk and prepare. Moving on to the next slide, there's some lessons learned that everyone, I think, can relate to as they built their first project. We have quite a bit of need, incredible need. So we need to innovate. There's no way for us to meet the needs of our people without innovation. And by that I mean financial innovation and actual building science innovation. So the Title VI loan is one of those innovations, financial innovations. Not everything that we try will work, will be a home run. But we have to try some things anyway, otherwise we'll never make advancements. We need to plan, and then we need to plan some more. Some of that was, we spent 6 months estimating the costs and planning and pre-planning for our project. And, you know, this was a confirmation for us. We even went so far as to fly down to Seattle to make sure that everything that was supposed to be on the boat was on the boat. And the lesson that we learned, we can build a development for less than a contractor can. And there's a good reason for that. Contractors have large overhead. Contractors are required to build for a firm fixed price. So they have to assume a giant risk financially. And they've got additional costs for everything that they do. A large successful contracting company will have a staff that is much more expensive than we are. Some other lessons, you know, in terms of the building science, you know, concrete is wonderful. It provides a lot of structural rigidity, and it provides a giant thermal mass. So if there's interruptions in heat, it's wonderful. But it's very expensive, and it's difficult to repair if anything goes wrong. So we're not going to do concrete flooring anymore, but that was an innovation we had to try and that we've learned. Title VI loan was a great innovation, providing us the flexibility that we needed. And forced account labor and acting as our own general was an unqualified success. There are improvements that need to be made in any project. You know, this is our first project. So if we hold up the sign that this is our first project as our own general, and we saved nearly $2 million, we saved 39% of the cost, I think it's easy to see Moving on, I have a few easy tips here for anyone. One of the things that makes this successful in my mind is our ability to act as a community partner. We can't do everything in a village. If we support the local economy, the people will see it and know it. And by that I mean renting locally where possible. If you have a contractor, require them to make a good faith effort to rent locally and hire locally. And make sure that Title VI, for us, Title VI is going to be a reasonable percentage of the project. We are planning for Title VI to be a regular piece of every project, and we are keeping it at a level where we always have a Title VI, piece of debt on our books. So some final takeaways on my end. The administration of remote rental housing is expensive, so we generally don't do remote rental housing. It's all home ownership. Innovation is necessary. It actually means you have to do something. And be a good neighbor. One of the things that we did is we shared our geotechnical reports. We actually shared the extra space on our monolithic pad we laid down, and we shared our architectural and engineering reports with the health clinic. And they built 2 duplexes next to our development. And because of that partnership, we now are friends. We can reach out to each other. But all that took was us being open to that partnership. I want to conclude my remarks on a topic that everyone should be aware of, but that is important to mention. My background is in numbers. My background is in finance. But I have a staff whose average tenure is over 10 years. And as we take on these projects that are general contracting and using force account on our own, we actually have to do construction, building, but we need planning, we need logistics work, we need the administration of those contracts, the accounting and the compliance. My staff stepped up out of their comfort zone and did this. And this would not have been possible without that belief in our mission and their experience doing the work that they do. So that's. I want to thank you for taking time to listen to some of the challenges and some of the successes of our recent development. And I'll go ahead and be quiet now for any comments or questions.
Great. Thank you, Chris. This is Heidi Frechette again. Thank you so much for sharing all of your great work, educating us on the challenges of constructing new housing in rural Alaska, and sharing your words of wisdom. It really was an educational piece in addition to a how-to piece, which makes it invaluable. It was eye-opening for me, and I'm sure for many of our tribal housing folks that joined us today. And really thank you for your commitment to developing new housing in your region to address the severe overcrowding that you discussed and the homelessness challenges that we face in Indian country and particularly in Alaska. So I have a few questions, and I thought we could talk about some issues, and then we can open it up for broader questions. So I'd say, what would you want a tribe or a TDHE to know when undertaking a similar project and similar work and utilizing the HUD programs to assist?
I think the best piece of advice, or the best thing that I wish I had known at the beginning was that for us, our ONAP office wants us to succeed. And, my background in finance, our regulators, our people, our program people from my history, they wanted to box us in and then potentially, sanction us. The ONAP office wants us to get to success. They want to get to yes. And so if I had known that a bit earlier, I would have started the conversations earlier about how we can get to a successful project. And our ONAP office has background, other people who have done projects like this, people with more experience than I had. And so if I had, known that, I would have reached out earlier, and it would have been much better. I think a second thing to understand, I think we got fixated on timing, and that drove some of our development. And if we could kind of look back on and say, the timing is not the end-all be-all of everything. Getting it right is the end-all be-all. We got to where we got almost all of it right, but just kind of, looking back on it, talk with your ONAP office, talk with your contacts, talk with the Title VI specialist, and to be okay with maybe a delay.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you for, recognizing that the Office of Native American Programs is here, because we all want to see more housing in Indian country. We all want to see families housed and needs addressed. So thank you for pointing that out. And we are a resource in here to help folks, and hoping that these webinar series as well help highlight other tribes have gone through similar things, have addressed needs and challenges in different ways, and you all know better than we do what your needs are for your community. So we are a resource and want to be helpful. What was your biggest surprise in undertaking this project for the first time?
So our biggest surprise was, quite honestly, the cost. When we received our contractors' bids, I couldn't believe them at first, and it set some things in motion that I was just I couldn't believe the cost that was being quoted. So what we had to do quickly is decide amongst ourselves, okay, can we undertake this? And we have a crew that has a lot of experience basically in pieces building homes. And we had a staff that our construction manager was experienced building up the homes, building up projects. So we had to marry them together. But I think just the cost was number one. Number two, lead time. I understand kind of people saying, "Oh goodness, this took forever," or "Why is it taking forever for housing to build a place?" Or we kind of hear those whispers kind of when we're around housing discussions. And the reason it takes a long time is to do it right and get everything staged. It has to take a long time. If it doesn't, it's not going to go. It's not going to go well. So we had about a year of planning, and if we had taken one extra year of planning, looking back on it now, I would have been okay with that. You know, so just those two realizations, time and cost, were big things in my mind that stick out.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And speaking of cost, how do you manage loan repayments as a regional housing authority, managing funds for multiple villages?
Well, you know, our consortium model kind of builds on everyone together, and so we don't have a strict separation of villages' tribal funds, and if we did, we would realistically never get to a development for any of them. So we mentally are, every tribe is contributing to the development in every region, in every other village. But managing that cost, what I've kind of mentally done is set a figure that is payable regardless of fluctuation in federal appropriation. And if appropriation goes down, we can make the Title VI payments on the projects that we've done. If appropriations go up, we have additional funding to do other to pursue other modernization projects or whatnot. But it took a lot of reviewing what's the number that will allow us to continue if worst case scenario happens. You know, for example, if appropriations are down 30%, what are we comfortable doing? And it also it's important to know the term. If we took out a 25-year loan for Title VI guarantee, you know, we'd have that for 25 years, and the incentive would be to just allow it to be a 25-year project. By shortening it to 10 years, for Sivunga, we are mentally saying, okay, in 10 years, there will be that spot of debt available to support that size of Title VI project again.
Thank you. That's really helpful, and you know, helps folks with planning, right? The planning piece is very important as well, as you mentioned. So, you know, we know there's a need for housing, and there's never enough resources to do all that you need to do in the communities. And heating costs are a huge expense for families, and you talked about the building materials, but can you share with us how you incorporate energy savings into your planning process?
Well, we don't have a specific way of saying, okay, this amount of money is designated to energy efficiency. We have a couple of guideposts that nudge us in a certain direction. Our first one, our state grant requires a certain level of energy efficiency for that. And so we kind of look towards making sure we're going to clear that hurdle. But the second item is that we look towards energy efficiency for our people to afford. As some background, Sivunga's per capita income is $7,000. So we know that people are struggling economically. So it's in our minds already before we've even advanced to any big stage that energy efficiency is going to be one of the most important things we can provide these new home buyers. And with building science being what it is, and a remote location, ease of construction is absolutely important. So structurally insulated panels from the right manufacturer and vetted properly provide both. They're essentially a Lego, and they assemble quickly and they ship in big, large pieces. You remember those big pallets that were being unloaded by the and so those two for us go together. They're quick to assemble and they're very highly efficient. In a different place, they would not be cost effective. But for us, they are. And so they just naturally married together for us to utilize that. You know, so it's just, it's on our minds. You know, we have a program where we provide energy assistance to people who are facing cutoff for their electricity or credit for their heating fuel purchases. And that's one of our most subscribed programs. So it's just in our minds all the time that we have to build a home that people can afford to heat.
Thank you, Chris. So I am done asking questions, and thank you. Your answers were very insightful and helpful in getting a full picture of the project and the challenges. So I think, Tyler, we're ready to open up if there are any questions on the line.
Sure. Ladies and gentlemen, to enter the question queue, please press #2 on your telephone keypad. You'll hear a notification when your line is unmuted. At that time, please then state your name and question. And you may also submit your questions over the chat by selecting all panels from the drop-down menu in the chat panel. Enter your question in the message box provided and hit send. And we do have one question over the phone line. Caller, go ahead. Your line is unmuted.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. This is Tiffany Martinson from Nome Eskimo Community in Nome, Alaska. Hi, Chris.
Hey, good morning.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
I just wanted to compliment your presentation. I'll admit to those listeners out there, Chris and I actually live in the same community and face similar challenges. His are much greater than mine, though, as I only manage one community compared to his 18. I was just wondering if you wouldn't mind sharing your experience in applying for the Title VI loan. You know, for someone like me, what type of recommendations might you have as far as planning ahead for any future projects we might be working on here in Nome?
Sure. Thank you for your kind words. But you know, on planning for the loan, I think your first key is to have an idea or have a round number of what you're going to be, or what's the project going to cost. And that means you probably are going to need to invest some time with an experienced project manager putting together a budget, or investing some money contracting a conceptual design or cost proposal. But once you have an idea of what the cost will be, it's actually very simple. You reach out to the ONAP office and you ask them about the Title VI loan guarantee. And it starts with you know, your initial call or email, and they'll set up a conference call with a few of the ONAP office staff and maybe the headquarters staff at the beginning, maybe not. But that first conference call is a big education in they're going to be asking you what you're wanting to do and what resources you have, and they're going to be telling you kind of what you can do, how you can do it. Our local office actually has a spreadsheet that you can just type in the annual need portion of the grant, and then your kind of mix of housing units, and it's already formulated, so it'll spit out a potential size of the Title VI loan you can draw. And officially, to get the thing started, once you've had a few of those conversations, you'll write up a request in a letter format, and the Title VI specialist from Washington will give you a list of items that you need to include in the request. But it's once that request is made, your sort of spot in line is flagged, and as you're working towards making the loan a reality, then you start looking to a lender. And for us in Alaska, the lender is First National Bank, but there are a couple of national lenders. There's a few owned by tribes that can do a Title VI loan too. But for us, that means we went to First National Bank, and we gave them the letter that we sent to headquarters that had the Title VI request, and then they responded, and we got to working with them. So the process is deceptively simple to just begin. So I would make that phone call to the ONAP office and just say, hey, I'd like to pursue this idea.
Yeah, and this is Heidi. Thanks for that, Chris. The contact for the ONAP office, I'll share it with you all. It's Jake Corey. His number is 202-402-3507. That's 202-402-3507. You can also reach him at jake.r.coury@hud.gov. That's jake.r.coury@hud.gov. Great. Tyler, are there any more questions on the phone?
Yes, we do have another question over the phone line. Caller, go ahead. Your line is unmuted.
Hi, this is Kirsten in the Seattle ONAP office, and I'm just curious to know if there are any communities you work with that are impacted by global warming and considering relocation, and then if so, which communities and how are you assisting, given that, planning just to build a few homes takes, a couple years. The relocation of an entire village is a whole nother situation.
Sure. We do have, there are global warming, there are issues surrounding a warming Arctic in every one of our communities. Savunga, the reason that we built the homes on those helical piers is because of the thought that if we were able to hook into bedrock as the ground is moving, that they would be more stable. In every one of our communities, the earth moves because of thawing of the ground. We have two communities that a couple of years ago held advisory votes on relocation, Shishmaref and Shaktoolik. They're both on sort of barrier islands. And beyond that advisory vote, we have not had more substantive discussion about what that means. And there's a really good reason for it. In Southwest Alaska, the community of Newtok has been attempting to move for years. And they even have a site called Makhdavik, and it is a few miles away in a better location, less prone to any climate changes in several generations. The problem is that getting federal support for the move is going to be difficult because a community in Western Alaska, a community in rural Alaska, is dependent on a school, an airstrip, a water system, and these are items that are millions and millions of dollars. Recently, the Denali Commission was able to cobble together $22 million to assist New Talk in moving, but that's not going to be nearly enough. And just the logistical challenge here, if we are able, if New Talk is able to move all of their homes to Muhtavik, all of their people will live up there, but the school is not up there. The post office is not up there. The airstrip is not close by. And New Talk is actually literally, there are homes that are a few feet from the water. I mean, not, you know, we're not talking like 20 feet. We're talking a few feet from falling in the water. So a home with that on, you know, literally on the brink, they're not receiving enough support to move everything. So it's made every community in Alaska that is facing erosion and facing climate issues stop and look at whether or not it's feasible to move wholesale like New Talk is attempting to.
Great, thank you, Chris. Tyler, are there any more questions on the phone?
We have no further questions over the phone at this time.
Okay. We have one question on the web chat. It says, what is the impact on out-migration to urban areas?
Yeah, I think there are two places that we can talk about migration. Our communities are, in my region, are growing. And they are growing in spite of a healthy out-migration to hub communities, Nome, and urban communities, Anchorage and Fairbanks. The reason that they're growing is what economists call natural increase. And what that means is people are having babies. And you can see in the demographics. The population, 44% of the village is under the age of 19. The largest building by far is the school. And people are living in multi-generational households. The housing crunch is real, but part of it is lots of people are having, there's a lot of young families happening. The second piece of the out-migration, people are pushed out of our villages because of a lack of housing. They're pulled out of our villages because of an economic opportunity or a perceived economic opportunity. And so there is a large population of people from our rural villages in our regional hub, Nome, and there is a large population of our villagers in Anchorage. And, you know, just to give you an example, growing up in Anchorage, my family's from Mecoria, 450 miles west of Anchorage. My best friend's family was from Gamble, 700 miles northwest of Anchorage. So people are moving. They're moving for various reasons, but housing is often one of the bigger reasons that they are moving out.
Thank you, Chris. We have another question. Even in a community that highly values family, what is the impact of overcrowding on cultural and behavioral health? Are the high impacts of stress?
So, you know, overcrowding is detrimental to quite a bit of the social indicators of health. And it's easiest to see in our kids. It's not just that the kids perform worse in schools because they're sleeping in shifts, because the home is so overcrowded they can't get homework done, and because they carry that stress with them to school. They're also behavioral, their behaviors are worse at school because of all of that comes with them. So it's not just their educational attainment and their performance on tests and whatnot. They're actually acting out at school more than kids not in an overcrowded home. The health impacts are real in overcrowded communities. Rates of respiratory illness and skin infection and having to stay home from school because of those are higher in overcrowded homes. And you know, there's a secondary or tertiary effect here. In an overcrowded environment where people are living family and family, there is going to be one of the potential outcomes is a feeling of despair. And unfortunately, that for some of those people, that might mean substance abuse to escape that feeling. So our overcrowding challenges. So my view is that home housing is the nexus of a healthy and economically productive life. And our homes that are not healthy, those impacts are going to radiate out to every other area, school, work, social settings. So everything that a person does is going to be impacted by their overcrowded situation.
Thank you. And can you share some of the work you're doing to collect stories on the importance of home to families in your community?
Sure. Our homes, so we, as an association of housing authorities in Alaska, we discovered, or we came to the realization that we are, when we are conducting advocacy with our policymakers, you know, we're writing reports and we're doing the behinds, and it's a very kind of, you know, state legislature way of approaching it. And what we're missing was the human connection. And so as an association, we brought on a fellow whose specialty was storytelling, kind of working with communities on telling a story of a project. And so we actually have a fellow that traveled to Nome and also to Savunga on another trip just here at the end of April to collect story. And she was very open about what story about housing she was collecting. Anyone who had a story, a feeling, a reaction when we talk about housing. And some of the quotations from that are pretty heartbreaking, but they are illuminating in a way that is different than just telling the statistics and the sort of formalized advocacy paper.
Thank you, Chris. And I'd love to hear more about that, because I think you point out a really important piece. We can talk about data and we can talk about numbers, but, you know, when I have Native youth visiting me in D.C. and saying, why does HUD allow 23 people to live in a 3-bedroom home? You know, those are the impacts. Those are the impacts on the children and the community and the elders. So thank you for sharing that. Tyler, I believe we may have a question on the phone.
Yes, we do. Next caller, go ahead. Your line is unmuted.
Hi, this is Nikki in Seattle, and I would like to know, how were you affected by the recent earthquake?
So we actually weren't. Nome was, you know, being 530 miles from Anchorage. There, we didn't even feel it. We actually learned of the earthquake on Facebook.
Okay, thank you. I'm glad you were okay.
Thank you. Tyler, do we have any other questions on the phone?
We have no further questions over the phone at this time.
And we have no further questions on the web chat as well. Great. Well, thank you everyone for joining us for our Best Practices webinar on Bering Straits Regional Housing Authority, and thank you so much to our presenter, President and CEO Chris Kolarek. I learned a lot. I'm sure we all learned a lot, but we're also very inspired to continue working hard to meet the needs of American Indian and Alaska Native families. So, Wan Wan, and thank you all very much. Goodbye.
That concludes our conference. Thank you for using AT&T Event Conferencing Enhanced. You may now disconnect.